All right. So here at the Seattle Atheist Church, the members ourselves give many of the talks. We have a planning meeting that's every quarter that's open to the whole community, where we brainstorm ideas for talks we'd like to hear and for talks we'd like to give. Then we vote on the ideas and schedule the talks to get the most votes. For today, please join me in welcoming Eva to give a talk about critical thinking and misinformation. Eva, you have the floor.
Thank you. I do have myself unmuted. Good. So first of all, I'm going to read the description on this for anyone who didn't see it or doesn't remember it. Today, we're all swamped with constant sound bites, images, rumors, spin, misunderstandings, complex information being oversimplified, and propaganda, and occasionally even well-presented facts and thoughtful analysis. Our understanding of some of this information is really high stakes because it shapes our understanding of urgent social issues and our decisions on health risks. So how can we effectively and efficiently evaluate the reliability of our news sources, detect bias, notice what's left out, confirm or disconfirm claims, and check sources? So the scope of this talk has to be pretty narrow because I don't have that long. We've got lots of talks up on the website covering other pieces of this question, like logical fallacies, persuasion techniques, things like that. So I'm trying to focus in this talk on kind of the first filter of, can I tell whether this is true or if I'm missing part of the picture before I believe this or pass it on? It's our responsibility as citizens to handle information thoughtfully. Just like we don't want to unwittingly infect ourselves or our neighbors with a disease, we need to be cautious and thoughtful about the information we take in and especially what we pass on so that we don't inadvertently spread errors or lies. Political battles are fought more with information than they are with weapons in the modern world. And if you are not cautious, you can end up a pawn in somebody else's propaganda plan. So we need to look carefully at the news that we're receiving. I think of myself as a pretty thoughtful consumer of news and disseminator of information. I often provide fact checks for my Facebook friends, go, hey, that's actually not accurate, or there's more context for this. Sometimes it's something that I already know. I know that's not true. I can give them a fact about that. Or I go, something funny about that, or I'm a little dubious. I'm going to go look it up right now, and then I can provide them some information. And I've been frustrated before by friends of friends who have posted things that I can tell are obviously not true or that I can trivially check. But I'm not immune to this stuff either. And I am using in this talk some examples where I corrected someone else and some examples where someone corrected me. I want to make it really clear that this is not a talk about how much better I am at checking this stuff. It's a talk about what we all need to be doing, even if we think we're smart. So I want to start off with kind of some basic principles for evaluating what you see. Let me just share my screen here and get the right thing up. There. Now I think you can all see the crap on my screen. The crap guide, it's out there on a bunch of different like university websites, but in the spirit of this talk, I looked up the original source is University of Berkeley. So the idea is they've got an acronym, CRAAP, or CRAP, 2 A's. And things you need to check are currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So I'm going to go into each of those in more detail. We're going to start with currency is about, is this a recent article? Sometimes you could be sharing an article that's perfectly true, but maybe it's from 3 years ago and it doesn't relate at all to the current situation. It could be the law has changed. It could be this is an event that doesn't relate to what's happening right now. It could be a scientific finding that actually has been debunked since then. So one of the first things you want to check is the date on what you're reading. If there is no date, you should immediately be suspicious because you cannot verify it you should look for another source if you think this might be real information. You don't want to just spread something that doesn't have important pieces of information like date on it. Place is another one that's very important, and this one comes more into relevance. Is the article relevant? Well, some articles may appear to be addressing a current topic. You must read past the headline and determine the relevancy of the content for your purposes. One of my first examples is a police brutality video that I posted. I'm not going to share the video with you because it's pretty unpleasant to watch and also somewhat time-consuming. But the content is there are a whole bunch of police officers in helmets with batons moving down the street. And, well, actually, at the beginning, they're beating someone who's lying on the ground. We don't see what happened before that. And then they move on, leaving the guy lying on the ground. A bunch more police officers come in with riot shields, more batons, more helmets, beat the guy some more as they're passing by. And then some cars, police cars come in, stop in front of the guy, get out, pick him up, move him to the curb, and drive on. It's pretty blatant and terrible police brutality. We don't see whether he did something beforehand, but obviously they're not arresting him and they're certainly not providing any kind of aid. This appears to be a genuine video with genuine, terrible police brutality. However, I encountered it in the context of reading about protests in Portland and in other cities around the US, including Seattle, and I assumed it was a video in Portland. It was somewhat similar to some of the action that I'd seen in Portland, and it was posted along with, you know, this is why we need to defund the Portland police, etc. But a couple friends of mine noticed there were some inconsistencies with that interpretation. If you look closely at the street signs in the video, you realize they are not in English, and they refer to places that are not in Portland or indeed in the United States. Little research shows it's in Belgrade, Serbia. So, well, it does represent part of the global problem of police brutality. It is not relevant to a discussion of defunding the Portland police or getting rid of the Seattle mayor or federal efforts in the United States to suppress protests. None of that is it relevant to. And realizing that is really important. So once that was pointed out to me, I went, hey, this is not actually a US video. I still haven't looked up the date. For all I know, it's 10 years old. So check the date, check the place, figure out the context for what you're looking at. The first A in CRAP is authority. Who is the author? What is the source for what you're looking at? Has that author written other articles on the topic? Are they some kind of a recognized expert? What are their credentials? Where did they get the information? What's the website domain? Is it really the thing it's claiming to be? Are there citations for the information in the article? Okay, so now it's time for me to show you another example. And this is one that someone who has actually attended this church reposted, just so you know that it's not just silly Christians or something that can be misled by information out there. Sorry, I'm going to need a second to get the right thing up here. How do I see the rest of my windows? Here we go. Sorry, I couldn't see my windows, so I can't tell where I'm going. All right. I'm not going to be able to display this, sorry. So there's a tweet that was widely disseminated by people, and it started with an Antifa flag logo, little red and black flags. It said like Antifa US. It said, alert, tonight's the night. Tonight we make a move. We take the residential areas, we move into the white hoods and take what's ours with hashtags Black Lives Matter and Fuck America. So someone that I knew posted this saying, wow, I'm really worried about this. And I looked at this and I went, okay, well, I know a little bit about Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and this seems like a really implausible message and a really implausible strategy. So I did a quick search and it was a known hoax. Twitter had already taken down the source account. And if you looked carefully, you could see that they had misspelled Black Lives Matter. It said Black Lives Matters, and matters was spelled with one T. And there were some other obvious errors in it. In addition to the fact that Antifa isn't a specific organization with a Twitter account, although there may be people who are using Antifa as part of their names. And they have no interest in invading residential neighborhoods, looting, or attacking people. And Antifa isn't all black. It's not identified with Black Lives Matter, although there's some overlap in cause, because police brutality is part of fascism. So I could look at that and go, the motivations here don't make sense. The messages don't make sense. And that's part of understanding the historical and social context of what you're looking at. One of the best things you can do to read critically when you're looking at US and local news is to read other things. If you have read history and you are reading world news, you will have much better context for what you're seeing in US news. You may be reading news around the world to understand how things are going elsewhere. You may be reading news from elsewhere, looking at the US to get a different perspective, how other countries are seeing us. Or you may be reading the history of anti-fascism, civil rights, revolutionary action, et cetera, to see how current events fit into a historical context. This is really important to understanding what you read. If you have not gotten any context, you're going to end up looking at something like Black Lives Matter, totally in isolation, and you may end up saying something stupid and racist, like all lives matter, which out of context sounds like it makes sense. But in the context of a historical response to hundreds of years of brutality and oppression and saying that Black lives do not matter, sounds stupid and racist. So the more you educate yourself, the more of an informed news consumer you can be. So let's see, that's two of my examples. Okay, then we have kind of a stupid example. Let's see if I can get this one to come up all right. It's a stupid example, and yet it was good enough to mislead a lot of people. So let me bring him up here. Okay, here is our buddy, the photoshopped in camo Antifa guy. This image, can you, am I sharing my screen okay now? Okay, I think so. So Fox News took images of Seattle's Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone and a guy in camo who may or may not have been part of the protests, and they photoshopped them together so it looked like he was standing in front of a broken window. And they also put the same image of the same guy in other contexts. Here he is in front of the Free Cap Hill sign. There are existing copies of the photo without him there. And if you look carefully at this image, you can see that his left arm is cut off before the end of the frame. It's not even halfway decent Photoshop. It is a terrible image. He's missing part of his arm. He's just standing there chopped into the image. In addition to that, they also posted photos of this flaming neighborhood with someone running through it, accompanying an article about Seattle. And this is a real photo. This one is not misleadingly modified. It is, however, a photo of Minneapolis, or I think St. Paul, actually. So sometimes it's really, really blatantly false information that you're looking at. And this is also part, some of this you can see. You can look at the guy and go, his arm's missing. You can look at him and go, hey, they used the same guy in all the photos. You can go, hey, there are existing copies of this photo without that guy in it. So you can visually tell that it's fake in some cases. You can also go, I've seen that photo before somewhere else, and it's not of that. But if you don't know all of these things, you can just look at this. This is from Fox News. Okay, know the bias of the sources that you're looking at. There are some diagrams that you can find showing the bias of various news sources. And I'll find you one of them here. Let's see. There we go, the media bias chart. Let me get that shared. Okay, there are a whole bunch of different versions of this chart out there. I'm sharing the one from the folks who came up with it originally. Adfontesmedia.com, but you can look up media bias chart, find lots of different versions of it. Some of them are a little more visually accessible, but this one has the most information and comes from the original source. So you can look it up however you want. But the general idea is this shows for a particular media source, it shows top to bottom, it's starting with pure fact reporting, original fact reporting, down to just making stuff up. In the middle, there's commentary, opinion, etc., analysis. Left to right is political leaning. So right up at the top, we have like AP, ABC, NPR, BBC. They're doing straight reporting with no particular bias. Then off to the left, we have increasing commentary and then bias. And off to the right, we have increasing commentary and then bias down to like InfoWars, which is just making stuff up. So that's the general idea. And sometimes we want to be reading stuff that is straight fact reporting. Sometimes we want analysis and commentary. But if we think we're seeing straight news and we're actually watching InfoWars, which is classified as entertainment, we're going to get some really, really wrong information. So you can check a chart like that. You can also check their sources. Why do they think this source is way over here? Look up what they're commenting on and how they made that decision. You can do that because that's the original source of that analysis. Okay, and then let's see, we've done currency, relevance, authority. Accuracy is also about bias, among other things. So accuracy is this article from an unbiased source? Can it be verified by multiple sources? If you see something surprising, go look it up. See whether, you can even look up a key phrase with the word hoax or debunked and see whether somebody has already debunked it. Look up and see if you can find the same story from other sources, if the story looks different in other sources. If it's only in one place with no links to anything else, either it's a brand new first, like primary source reporting, or maybe somebody just made something up. So look at the timing and is this a brand new story, or is this something where there should be other stories about it? The final piece of crap is purpose. Does this article provoke an emotional response? Is that what it's for? If it's designed to make you feel outraged or smug, you should be suspicious to start with, because we really like feeling outraged or smug, and we like to pass those messages on that confirm our existing biases. So check, especially if you're like, yeah, that. Look up their sources. So this is where I quote my fourth example, which is a little image showing some statistics. And let me find that one here. Okay. All right, so here's the image I shared. You should not unquestioningly believe it just because I posted it in my talk. So this image says a 1% drop in GDP is a recession. We called a 6.5% drop in GDP the Great Recession. In 1929, we called a 15% drop in GDP the Great Depression. What the fuck do we call a 33% drop in GDP? Okay, so the implication here is we are currently having a drop in GDP that is vastly greater than the Great Depression. That's not actually accurate. I reposted this, and a couple of friends of mine who follow economics more closely than I do corrected me on this. The first thing that's wrong in this, which they actually didn't mention, is that a 1% drop in GDP is not the definition of a recession. I looked it up when I was prepping for this talk, and it's usually defined as a drop in GDP over 2 successive quarters. And some economists like to count it only if it's a 1.5 to 2% drop. So first of all, the definition is inaccurate. Second, if you look carefully at these numbers and compare them to economic knowledge, which I didn't have at hand, but one of my college friends did, you realize they're not talking about the same thing. The Great Recession and Great Depression numbers here appear to be quarterly averages from the entire year's drop. The drop currently that they're implying with the last sentence is over the entire period of the drop selected for. So they're both real numbers, or all three are real numbers, but they're not equivalent numbers. If you want to compare these numbers, you need to either take the drop over the entire period of decline, which you can do for all of these. Well, you can't do it for the current one. It's probably going to get worse, so the numbers will be worse to compare. Or you can take a month or a year and compare those, or you can compare an average, a quarter that's an average of a year. But you should not be comparing totally different things and then going, aren't these numbers amazing, put next to each other. So these are real numbers used very inaccurately and very misleadingly. So I should not have passed that on without doing a little bit of checking. So once my friends had gone, hey, those aren't right, I went, oh, sorry, and I posted a correction, but I was still just taking their word for it. So before I actually did this talk, I did a little more checking than that. And what I did is I took the phrase GDP drop, Great Depression, and then looked at the first few links and their sources, like where they were coming from. And then I did the same thing for other similar phrases. And I did not go through and calculate out the equivalent measurements for each of those different ways of measuring it for each of the drops in GDP. But I did satisfy myself that what my friends had reported was accurate as far as the way it was misrepresented. So we don't always have the time to go through and check everything, but basically we shouldn't be passing things on that we haven't done a minimal check on as to where this information came from. That tweet that I shared, I don't know that person. I don't know where they got their numbers. They could have been completely wrong. As it happened, they were just hand-selected in misleading ways. And we don't need to do that. The numbers are really bad. We can compare them honestly, and they will be really bad. So let's try not to share stuff that is misleadingly selected or presented. And let's try to use our rational brains to comment on the world and analyze the world. So as I said, there's a lot more that can be said about how to rationally consume information, including analyzing logical fallacies and avoiding being manipulated, et cetera, et cetera. I just wanted to cover some of the basics here. So the summary for crap, we have currency, check the date, relevance, check the place and context, authority, who is saying it, what are their sources, accuracy, make sure it is true, purpose, why did they write this, are they trying to manipulate you, what is their bias. So if you do those things, you will be believing and passing on less crap and being more rational, which is, of course, one of our core causes. Thank you.